Welcome back to abettersociety.info. My name is Joe Bass. In our third video, I said that this fourth one would deal with thinking about thinking. We're going to be looking at broad-scale thinking patterns. When I do consulting work with large corporations or government agencies, I often recommend that the client includes an out-of-the-box activity at the beginning of the session. And the reason for this is that people on a day-by-day basis are trying to solve immediate problems. But if you're going to really look at a large corporation and identify big ways to try to make it better, you have to look at things in a different light. And so that's the purpose of out-of-the-box thinking activities. Now, that's what we're going to do in this fourth video. We're going to have an activity that is designed to help you look at things differently. Now, you may remember that I mentioned a book by Jared Diamond called Guns, Germs, and Steel. And one of the great values of this work by Diamond is that he makes us look at broad scope issues over a long period of time. He's got a book that's less than 500 pages long, and yet it deals with 13,000 years of human history. And by looking at these broad scope issues, he helps us understand things that we wouldn't be seeing if we were just looking at immediate daily issues. So that's what this activity is about. It serves the same purpose. Now, in this activity, I want you to just look at maybe the last 1,000 years. Let's say, just go back to the year 1000. And for the activity, we're going to use the concept of involuntary servitude. Now, the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution says, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So, we're talking about slavery. We're talking about involuntary servitude. Now, there's different types of involuntary servitude, and slavery is one of them, but there are other ones. So, what I want you to do, looking back to the year 1000, I want you to make a list of the physical characteristics of the average American whose ancestors lived in involuntary servitude over the period of years between now and the year 1000. Okay, you're going to make a list of the physical characteristics of the typical American whose ancestors lived in involuntary servitude between now and the year 1000. So you can hit the pause button, make your list. You know, if we had a lot of money, we could have some kind of fancy activity here with music playing and while you made your list. But we don't have that much money. So you can hit the pause button, and then you can come back. Okay, I'm going to assume then that you have your list. Physical characteristics of Americans, typical Americans who lived in involuntary servitude during the last 1,000 years. So to get the answer, really all you had to do was just look at me and list my physical characteristics. Now, it's true that I have some American Indian ancestry, and I might not get quite as white as my Caucasian neighbors during the winter, but what I look like is typically what Americans whose ancestors lived in involuntary servitude back 1,000 years ago, and that's the case. And if you're not convinced about that, you can look up on the internet the word Villein, V-I-L-L-E-I-N. And if you do a search on that word, you'll find out that most Europeans lived in a condition of involuntary servitude. And today we commonly use the word serf, which is the French word for people who lived in involuntary servitude. They were people who were bound to the land. They had to work for their master. The product of their work went to the master. They were allowed some types of food to eat, and they had to specifically wear certain types of clothing in order to know that they were not free people. And this type of activity continued in Europe up to relatively recent times. It was all over Europe. The Anglo-Saxons had slaves, for example, during this period of time and afterwards, or before that time. So that may be a surprise to people. We don't think of our ancestors having been living in a condition of slavery or involuntary servitude. I mean, we've been here in America for, a few hundred years, and we've forgotten that was really the case for most all of us. And actually it's true of people of all races. That involuntary servitude was a standard pattern of society over the world for quite a long time. And it actually continues today. So that should be an out-of-the-box activity, out-of-the-box thinking activity for you. And you might do a little research to really confirm that that is in fact the case, because it's something we don't think about. Most of the time we just think about short-term issues. Maybe we'll think about the last 20 years, or the last 30 years, the last 150 years. But we don't often, as Jared Diamond found out, we don't often look at these big-scale, large-scale, long-term issues. And if we're going to really see the big-term patterns of things, in order to see how we can improve society, then we need to look at things in those terms. So there's going to be a series of videos that's first going to deal with what I call the hunter-gatherer social pattern. And this was the social pattern that came before Jared Diamond's book was written. I mean, before the period of time that he wrote about. This is how people lived before 13,000 years ago. But of course, people live this way today. The second series of videos will deal with societies based upon class-based societies. And it was these societies that included involuntary servitude, slavery, if you wish to use that word. And then we'll have a series of videos that deal with classless societies, societies where there is no class. So that's what we're going to be all about here for a while. We'll have a series of videos about the pattern deal that were developed by the hunter-gatherers. We'll have a series of videos dealing with class-based societies, and then we'll have a series of videos dealing with classless societies. And so I think that if you look at these videos and investigate the concepts included in them, that it will help you see the world society in a better way, in a different way. And when we look at things in different ways, just like at the beginning of corporate strategic planning sessions, then that helps us find ways to make things better in the world. And I think you find that really interesting. So I'm going to sign off now, and I'll be talking with you later. Thanks a lot.